Welcome everyone. I hope you're enjoying the conference. My name is Sonia and I'm here to talk to you about the trials I'm running at Newcastle University in no-till vegetable production. Now, I'm glad to see lots of people because I wasn't sure at this conference. It's not so much a veggie conference, so I'll go back there. So my name is Sonia, as I said, and I have an extensive background growing veggies and an ancestry of both farming and like really a deep connection with nature and really caring for the environment. That goes way back in my history, family history. And I've always grown vegetables and I've always used mulches. The change to reducing my tillage and not tilling at all, that's been more recent, but I've always used mulches. So I've tried a lot of different mulches and sort of have a good understanding of how they work. And I do really feel that no-till and the use of mulch is a really important step for us to take as vegetable farmers. I'm running 2 trials within my PhD, and that's because one of them, the first one is broccoli, growing broccoli, and we're growing that into a cover crop that's been either crimp rolled or mowed. So I'm trialling both. I'm growing the same cover crops, duplicating them so that we can see the difference between when we crimp roll and when we mow to terminate the cover crops. And we're certainly seeing a difference, and I'll show you that as we go. And the second trial is growing organic vegetables, and that's also 100% no-till. And in both trials, I'm comparing the no-till with tillage-based controls. The biggest difference between these 2 trials, and the reason I wanted to do both of them, is in the second one, we're using transferred mulches. We're bringing all the mulching in rather than growing it in situ. And I'm using 2 different mulches in that trial. One of them is the compost mulch, which is really quite popular at the moment, and the other one is using silage. And I'll talk about both of them in detail as we go. But firstly, just a quick look at why no-till is important. There's a lot of environmental issues associated primarily around the health of our soil and the loss of our soil. And those are just a few pictures I took up in my local environment. That's the River Weir, brown with topsoil, just in a time last year when it was raining so much. And then that's a local field just up the road from me, where, as you can see, just the soil's just running off the surface. If we look to nature, soil is pretty much always covered, and disturbance is minimal. And this helps to protect the soil, of course, from erosion. But beyond that, and this is sort of what inspires me, amazing things happen when we cover the soil, and especially when we're using something like a silage mulch or some kind of mulch that sort of has that relationship with the soil that decomposes and breaks down gradually into the soil, keeps the soil covered, and amazing things happen. These are just some pictures I took in one of my trials, and that's under a silage mulch. And as you can see in the picture on the left, the vegetable roots actually grow into the mulch. So I've pulled back the mulch and taken those photos. And so they're accessing nutrient from the mulch, not just from the soil. Then that top right picture, if you look closely, you can see the holes of the earthworms. So those are the anisic, the deep burrowing earthworms, and they are coming up. And because the soil is covered with the mulch, they're able to feed on that surface and interact with that surface. And that, of course, results in what we see in that lower right picture, castings sitting on the surface, and castings have an amazing higher the nutrients in castings, once they've gone through the body of the worm, are much higher in nutrient content in available nutrients, so nutrients that are available to the plants. There's a very important interrelationship between soil life, which I'm sure you probably all know, soil life and plants. They evolved together, and so there's a very important interrelationship between the two, and plants generally will give up around 20% of the photosynthetic energy that they produce to ensure that they have soil life around them, to feed the soil life and to keep the soil life there. Another really important factor and benefit of not tilling is weeds. So weeds tend to, and I'll talk about this, I'll show you the results in one of my trials, or both of them. Weeds, tillage does generate weeds. It creates this lovely bed, and up come the weeds very, very quickly. Reducing tillage can actually increase the challenge of weeds. But if you eliminate tillage altogether, and especially if you use a mulching material to keep the soil covered and minimise disturbance of that, then weeds can be dramatically reduced. And I do have data showing that as well. So let's just get into the first trial. So this trial is, I've grown 5 different cover crops, or mixes of cover crops, and I've done those at different sowing rates. So sorry, it's not 5 different cover crops, it's different combinations of cover crop. They are all cereal rye and or hairy veg. And but I've incorporated different sowing rates. The reason being there that, the recommendation for this technique is often to increase sowing rates, and so I wanted to look at that. I've also looking at whether fertilising the cover crop has an impact on the yield of the cover crop. And in this technique, the more biomass you produce with your cover crop, then the better your subsequent vegetable crop will be, because of things like moisture retention, nutrient release from the mulch, and suppression of weeds. So we are always aiming as much as possible in this technique to maximise biomass. And so things like increasing the sowing rate or adding fertilising the cover crop might be beneficial because, they might increase the biomass. But we also have to look at the economics of that. So is there a benefit that's sufficient that would justify the added cost of those things? And then we're looking at whether crimp rolling or mowing is more effective. So vegetable farming is quite a different thing. This technique has been done a lot, especially in America, for producing soybeans and grain crops. But there's really not a lot of research or work done with vegetables. And so we're looking at whether crimp rolling or mowing is better in this system. And those are all compared with each other, but also with a tilled control that did not grow any cover crops at all. That's quite a large trial. It's done on with a 4-wheel tractor. There's 24 treatments, and those are all replicated 4 times, and a total of 96 plots. And as I said, primarily this one's different from the other because we're producing the mulch in situ. To give you an idea, whenever we do agricultural field trials, we always want to run them at least for 2 years. And so the data I'm showing you is from the first year when I ran this trial. And we started that in September 2022. We did start as well September 23. I was going to run it in 23, 24, but the weather conditions were just so bad that actually that didn't go ahead. And so I currently have a cover crop that's about to be terminated as soon as I get home with my my second year of this trial. So we planted in September 2022. Then in June the following year, we crimp rolled or mowed. So half of the treatments, everything is duplicated exactly the same, but half of them were terminated with a crimp roller and half of them were terminated with a mower. And then pretty much immediately we planted some broccoli seedlings into the mulch and harvested in September, harvested the broccoli. On the left there, you can see, this is termination day, and you can see where the mower's gone through, and on the right, you can see where the crimp roller's gone through, so quite a different effect and a look. We selected the cereal rise, because we are further north and there's not such a long growing season. So we're selecting for high biomass and early maturation. I have 2 hybrid rye cover crops in there, and one of those cultivars was sown at 150% of the recommended rate. And then, so those are pure cereal rye, and then we have 2 more cover crop mixes where I have a proportion of 60% rye and 40% hung volosa hairy vetch, and then another one again where those are sown at 150% of that sowing rate. So looking at sowing rates, and then the control has the broccoli grown in bare cultivated soil. So in terms of biomass, remember I said how important biomass is for this technique to work really well. We got significant difference, which is exciting, always exciting for a scientist. When you get significant difference, you actually have to have really quite a big difference for it to show up statistically. Because you in a trial like this, you have 4 replicates, and that allows the statistics to be done. And so it was very exciting that I got a statistical significance, if I can say the words. And the winner was the rye vetch mix, not the one that got the higher. So I should explain. HV was one of the ryes, so that's a pure rye. It's hell top rye. The one that just has an R under it, that is SU pluralis rye, another high-performing rye in our climate. And then the third bar is R150, which is where we've sown that same rye at 150% of the recommended sowing rate. The fourth bar is where we have rye and vetch combined. And the fifth bar, RV150, is where we've got rye and vetch at 150% of the recommended sowing rates. And it was really interesting that that one actually had a lower biomass production. And this is the biomass in dry matter tonnes per hectare. And so perhaps crowding, something like that, was causing that. And then the effect of the fertiliser was also interesting. There was actually no significant difference from the fertiliser. So in this particular year, with those particular weather conditions we had, the soil that I was working with, it wouldn't have been economically viable, economically recommended to add that fertiliser. Everything's done organically, so that was hoof and horn. Okay, I just thought I'd show you this. You can see the different treatments there. Some of them have got vetch in them and some of them haven't. And this is the mowing. Very different effect. And this is looking immediately after termination at how the two looked. So on the left we have where it was roller crimped and the hairy vetch was springing back. It is difficult to terminate vetch using a crimp roller. The rye was extremely successful, the crimp rolling. And then, of course, where we've mowed, the vetch is, it's not going to come back. Well, it didn't come back at all in the mowed treatments. That's just a close-up in case you haven't seen the effect of the crimp roller. You can see the lines through. I hope you can see it. Can you see the lines through the vetch where it's actually crimped? I find that interesting. I thought you might like to see that. And how with so the rye, you can see that has actually killed all of that rye, that crimping. You can see the bars where they've gone through and crimped it. And then the vetch is sort of damaged, but it doesn't have that same crimping effect because it's structurally quite a different plant. This is how things looked once the broccoli was growing. And these are fairly typical pictures of of the different treatments. On the left, the control, lots of weeds. And then the rye, there was also lots of weeds where we had pure rye. There just wasn't sufficient biomass in there to suppress the weeds. So there was quite a lot of weed. Where we crimped the rye and vetch combination, the vetch grew back. And you can see it happily sort of growing there amongst the broccoli. And it didn't affect yield that much, but I'm about to show you that. That's how it all played out. Where we mowed the vetch rye combination, we had this beautiful mulch and no vetch growing. So here we have the yield. This is how it all played out, and there was so much difference with the different treatments. And we got significance again, big significance. So again, you can see my little letters along the bottom. The first one is the C, which is the control. And for each treatment I've got in the blue, it's where it was in a crimped cover crop, and the orange, which is where it had been mowed. And this is the marketable broccoli yield. So to qualify, it had to be 8 centimetres in diameter. And that's why there was actually none of the broccoli in the control reached that. In this trial, I don't have irrigation, and so it really shows up things like the effect of the irrigation. And then, of course, I didn't weed. I just wanted to do a really simple, I guess it's simple, it's like a really strong representation of this is what will happen. If you do this, you can actually get a marketable yield. In that year, we got really good marketable yield where we mowed those rye and vetch cover crops without any irrigation at all. And the control just didn't survive it, just didn't come up with the goods. The little letters, I should explain what they mean. Those are to do with just the statistics. If a bar has the same letter above it, so we see how there's lots of A's, though in those cases, the A's are all, there's no significant, even though you can see there's the tendencies, there's no significant difference that comes up mathematically between a treatment. If it's got the same letter on it, if it's got a different letter, then it's significantly different. So the two orange ones that go up really high, that's the mowed rye and vetch, and the rye and vetch at the higher sowing rates. Those were very, very significantly different from those lower A's. And then where you've got AB, it sort of sits in between. So there. All right, so the timing of termination in this method is really, really important, critical to success. We have to, what we're doing is growing annuals. The cover crops are annuals, and what that means is that if we can catch them at the right moment in their growth, then they've put all of their energy into producing their seeds. And if we crimp it or we cut it down, mow it down, before those seeds are viable, then it's possible to terminate the cover crop and then grow a subsequent crop into that without any herbicide whatsoever. And so timing is so important. It's also so important because we're wanting to maximise biomass. And there's a point in the growth of those cover crops where we are maximising biomass. And we're also wanting to optimise the carbon to nitrogen ratio, and I'll talk about that a bit more as we go. So with any cover crop or any mulch, the carbon to nitrogen ratio of that mulching material is really important because we want to get a balance between the more carbon you have in a mulching material, the slower it will break down. So if you have, for example, a wood chip mulch, it's going to hang around for years and years and years. Or even like a pure cereal rye mulch will last a lot longer than something that's got some legume in it. And also because the legume's got higher nitrogen, so it increases, reduces the ratio because the carbon's the first one. And so, but also when an annual is growing, as it grows from like a little seedling up to these cover crops were like up, above my head when we terminated them. And at that stage, the carbon ratio gradually increases as they mature. And so there's that point, there's this sweet point in terms of combining legumes and cereals, and also in terms of the actual time when those plants are terminated for the carbon to nitrogen ratio. I've put a few typical carbon to nitrogen ratios up there for you to see. The ideal time for cereals is early milk to soft dough, so a cereal rye. Hairy vetch, we're looking for full flowering to early pod set. With the vetch, the biomass keeps increasing through as it's flowering and even into pod set. It does keep increasing. In those pictures, I took those quite a bit before we terminated, and that's just to show you, see the little yellow things hanging down from the rye heads, those are the anthers, and the rye is about probably about mid flowering at that point, and the vetch on that same date had only just started flowering, so it was way too early for the vetch. 3 weeks later, the vetch was going really well. Biomass had increased a lot. It was flowering. But still, and the rye had finished flowering. You can see there's no more anthers on those rye heads. We terminated 10 days after that. And at that point, yeah, the vetch biomass had increased quite dramatically. Okay, so that's my overview of that trial. I'm going to talk now about my other trial, which is where we're transferring the mulch in. Only 4 treatments. This one's quite a lot smaller, again, but it's still replicated 4 times, so there were 16 plots. There's a tilled control, and then there's 3 no-till treatments. 2 of them have actually, I'll go to the next slide because I talk about it a bit more. So the tilled control, we initially established it using a moldboard and power harrow, then later the BCS, as we had to put up a rabbit fence, and it was a bit hard to get all that big equipment in, which was a shame. The mulch treatments, there's 2 mulch treatments 2 compost treatments, and they are identical. They both use Green Waste Pass 100 compost, and that has been applied at 5 centimetres, which is the equivalent of 180 tonnes per hectare of dry matter. And that's the minimum that it's been found, the minimum to suppress weeds. And there's 2 compost treatments which are identical except for aeration. And I'll show you how I did the aeration. This trial is all done on a hand scale. The tilled control received the same 5 centimetres of compost tilled into the soil. So we're looking to keep things as even as possible across things like what the nutrient input is to the system, so that we can identify other things like tillage and the effect of that. This is showing you how I did the aeration. What I've been doing is forking along the actual planting line. Quick and easy, really quick and easy. It's not disturbing the mulch at all. It's not disturbing that weed barrier that we've created. And I'm just going along the planting line, very quick, but has a really dramatic effect, which I'll talk about. Okay, my 4th treatment in this trial is using silage. And again, I applied it at the minimum depth to achieve suppression of the weeds. Onions, one of the reasons I chose onions for this trial is that they're quite a long growing season. So it really puts the mulch to the test in terms of weeds and in terms of how long will it stay on the ground. So 8 centimetres, which worked out at 18 tonnes per hectare dry matter, is about the minimum you can go with something like a silage. Silage is great because the ensiling process kills the weed seeds. And so it actually goes on, it's a mulch that's 100% free of weeds. It also has a really nice carbon to nitrogen ratio, which means that there's enough carbon there. It did last the whole crop, the whole time through the 4 months for producing this crop, but then it's also got sufficient nitrogen that you get good release of nutrient. It's interesting that it's not just the nitrogen that releases a bit more quickly when you've got that ideal ratio. The things like potassium and mental blank. Potassium and phosphorus also release a little bit more quickly from a material that's got a higher nitrogen content. Just a caution, if you do want to jump in and do some silage, you do have to wait 7 to 10 days because it gases off and it can damage the seedlings, or you can irrigate it. So again, we got significant difference, so all very exciting. And in this case, the lowest yield was where we used the compost and we didn't aerate. So at this point, it was actually the second year after this field had been converted to no-till. The first year I grew some lettuce. So this is 2 years in of no tilling at all. And one of the reasons that I wanted to include aeration in this trial is that when you convert to no-till, initially a soil that's been tilled continuously it actually damages the soil structure. It damages the aggregates in the soil structure. And so it can actually compact quite a lot, and you can have compaction problems when you first convert a soil to no-till. And so aeration in those initial years can be very beneficial. And in this case, we got a statistically different onion yield. Everything else was completely identical between that second bar and the third bar. But we got a much higher yield where we aerated and used the compost. The other two, the tilled was pretty much exactly the same yield as the no-till aerated compost, and the silage gave us the highest yield, though it was so close. It was neck and neck. As you can see the little letters, it actually was still an A. It didn't get to have a C on it because it was not quite far enough different, even though you can see that there's certainly a tendency that the silage treatment was the best in terms of yield. And those yields have been converted to tonnes per hectare, and they are actually excellent yields in terms of what a farmer would hope to produce. I included this slide. I just wanted to show you that the silage treatments, those bars are just showing you, I measured all of the diameter of the onions because onion farmers are paid more for certain sizes. And so the silage treatment had actually that middle bar that sticks right up, those are 8 centimetre diameter onions, which, as you know, when you go to the supermarket, even if you go to the supermarket, you pay a little bit more for that size, and so the farmer also gets paid more for that size. The weed cover, of course, was very different between those treatments, with the tilled having a lot more weeds, and that was significant again. The tendency, the silage had the least weeds of all. Time spent weeding. This is the minutes over the entire time that we were growing the onions, so a lot more time spent weeding. And this was done really... I did the weeding as quickly as I could and as efficiently as I could with the best implements, all by hand though, because this is a hand scale trial, just to give an idea of how much more time it does take. You know, how much time, and that's a cost, it takes to weed. But because I'm doing things by hand, the planting, and we've got like this soil that hasn't been lovely tilled and prepared and really, really easy to plant plugs into, the tilled is faster to plant. And so I wanted to put that slide up and show you, I timed all of the planting as well. And in terms of the cost of labour, it was slowest to plant into the silage. And so it sort of evened out in terms of the time cost. This is showing you, I collected soil moisture data all the way through, and that graph shows, I should probably point to it out so you can see properly. The blue bars that go straight up, that's either rainfall in millimeters, or it's irrigation. We irrigated this trial just once. Like once things were growing really, you know, when onions get to that point where they're just growing really strongly, they do draw a lot of moisture, and we didn't have any rain. So we made the decision, we irrigated 25 millimeters at one point. But what you can see, and the grey lines are the moisture for the no-till, for the till control. Always less moisture all the way through. The orange, light green and dark green are the no-till treatments, and they were neck and neck all the way through till the end, and you can see that they diverge right at the end, the orange one being the silage. And by this point, those onions were larger, the plants were drawing more moisture, but also the silage was starting to thin out. And so the moisture retention wasn't quite as good anymore. This one, the light green, that's the aerated compost, and that is also diverging a little. And that again, I think that's really just that they were growing, they were bigger. The plants were bigger, they needed more moisture. Oh, this is my last slide, I think. This is just some considerations, and this is leading into questions. I really hope we get to have a chat of the sort of things that you would want to consider when you are, if you do want to choose a mulch. Of course, you will be looking at whether it's readily available and low cost. Really important to look at the carbon to nitrogen ratio because it governs decomposition rate. So we're weighing up, if we want to have a high carbon mulch, then, you know, we'll get better weed suppression, it'll hang around a lot longer, versus how quickly will it release the nutrient. And that nutrient, as you can see from this trial, the release from the nutrient, and this is something that I am gathering data about, but that data's not ready yet. So I can't show you that, but my hypothesis is that part of the reason we have that higher productivity in the silage treatment is not just because of the weed suppression, because the compost was pretty good as well, and the moisture retention, but it's probably to do with the release of nutrient. And so I did gather soil all the way through while it was growing, soil testing and testing the mulches, but I just don't have that data ready yet. The texture of the mulch is really important in terms of, will that mulch be open enough that it's going to let air and water, rain come through? You can actually get a thatching effect from mulch, and to some extent in that slide where I showed you where the rainfall had gone down, we didn't have much rain and the soil was drying out. When we collected the soil moisture data, we found that there was an unevenness across the compost beds because there was a bit of, it's like a thatch. I mean, if you imagine, silage can do the same. It can thatch if it dries out too much and the soil underneath dries out too much, and like the plants are sucking all the moisture out from under the mulch, and if it all dries out a bit too much, then yes. But silage is generally better than, the compost was doing more thatching, and so we were putting in our soil moisture monitors, and in some areas it was more dry than others because of that problem of the moisture not being able to go through the compost layer. It's not a big problem, but it's certainly a consideration. And another thing is what happens when you're harvesting and weeding. So with something like compost, it can be a problem, especially over the years, that it's no longer a mulch sitting on the soil. It starts to become part of the soil, and you can, you pull out your weeds or you pull out your crop, and you can get that mixing, and then that, of course, reduces the weed, the wonderful weedless problem. You start to get more weeds. And in my trial this year, we are starting to get quite a lot more weeds in the compost treatment because it's into its third year. And whereas with silage, you are reapplying the silage. You can reuse it, and I always do reuse some of that, but you do put back that 8 centimetres of silage again at the beginning of the crop. And so you don't have that problem of the mixing of the soil. I hope that makes sense, mixing of the soil into the mulch, because you don't want the soil to mix into the mulch. Yeah, and why would you use transferred mulch compared to in the first trial where we're growing the mulch and we're terminating it, we're growing a cover crop. So growing a cover crop like that, because, like I said, it was right up, really a lot of biomass, and there's also a lot of roots under the ground. You've got all this biomass up the top. You've also got lots of roots, and cereal rye and also hairy vetch do have a lot of, they do have very fibrous root systems. And so it is amazing for the soil. It's amazing, as you probably know, and as I've alluded to, there's this incredibly important relationship between the soil life and plants. And so when you've got this great biomass above and great biomass below the soil, and you terminate that, then you just do amazing things for the soil. And the soil, it's really beautiful what it does for the soil. But of course, you can't really do something like grow an onion crop successfully in our climate, certainly not up north where I am, growing the cover crop, because you have to wait till about June to terminate it, because you have to get it at the right growth stage. And so, you are devoting quite a lot of time of your land to growing that cover crop. So ideally, we need rotations where we're doing both. And in some years, you might be doing a brassica crop or something that's really well suited to growing your cover crop, and you're getting all those amazing benefits for the soil. And then you're going in the next year with a crop that, like onions, that needs to have a transferred mulch. I hope that all makes sense. Just some acknowledgements to my supervisors. I'm working with 2 supervisors from Newcastle University, and then Dr. Julie Cooper, who's with the Organic Research Centre, and Paul Flynn, who is the farm director at East Durham College, where one of my trials is being hosted. So that's the end of my presentation. I'd love to answer any questions.
Hiya, that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. How do you find the effect of the mulched cover crops on slugs and snails? Because that's always my worry.
Excellent question. Very, very good. In my trials, I didn't find that they were worse, but I did use a small amount of the slug pellets, because I did need to do that, or I wanted to protect them. But I always protected equally across. When we first, in one of the trials, because I actually also ran this trial at East Durham College where I'm doing the onions, so I did do a small version, and that soil is a bit different. And in that trial, when we first terminated and planted the broccoli, the problem I actually had was mice. Yeah, and I realised that mice, there was a little vole family, actually, not mouse, that had set itself up in the cover crop, and it did come and grab some of my seedlings, which I replaced. So yes, there can be issues with slugs and other pests that get involved. Personally, I find there's so much other benefit, and I've been doing this for so many years, and I have tried. This isn't the first time. This is the first time I've done it really scientifically, but I've looked at it, and it's so consistent that the higher yields, and you can plant your veggies and kind of leave it almost with a mulch, something like a silage, because you don't have to water anywhere near as much, and you don't have to weed. And so there's pros and cons of any decisions we make when we farm or we grow things. So yes, with the onions, there certainly wasn't an impact from the slugs. That was more with the mulches.
It's just a quick one. What was the silage that you used?
Okay. I think I had on the slide, it was pit silage, and it's clover. It's a typical grass clover silage, and it was pit silage. And I have analysed, but I haven't got the results yet of the covered in nitrogen. Is that what you needed to know? Yeah. But I actually have also, of course, used baled silage, and it's also amazing. So
you applied centimeter layer of compost because to control the weeds, but this is a huge amount of compost. It's 180 tons dry matter per hectare.
yes.
So it might be 350 tons compost. So it's a huge amount of nutrients you apply. When you do it yearly, I think there might be a risk of nutrient losses. Perhaps not in the short term, but in the long term, sure.
Yes, absolutely. Very good question. I personally am more in favour of using things like the cover crops and the silage, but the compost is a very, it's a very popular thing to be doing, and I think there can be issues with with the nutrient release from that much compost, but you also don't have to keep going back. In the second year of this trial, I didn't go back. I didn't have to reapply the compost. Also, that particular compost, the release of nutrients is really slow. Even though you're putting on this huge amount of nutrient, the release of the nutrient is really quite slow. Because the nutrient releases, and yes, and I have gathered the data, and I will be, hopefully you can get to read my report when it all comes out and it's published, looking at what is happening under the soil as the crop was growing. But yes, important point.
Hello. I'm interested to know the method you used to sow the broccoli onto the crimped or the cooked ground.
Yes, great question. And this is, of course, the thing is we're developing new systems. I had to do it by hand. Everything else was tractor, but yes, and it was hard work. And I didn't mention that. I did aerate. I went in with, I did the same thing with the fork in that trial. And luckily I had a big, strong young man helping me. But yeah, it was hard because we had no irrigation and the soil was really hard. And this year we're actually, like I said, as soon as I get back, I'll be doing it again. And it's going to be even harder because the soil is so dry. But the thing is, there are implements starting to be developed for doing this on scale. And there are planters that can cut through the mulch and plant, you can even use them to plant vegetable plugs. And I'm really, really interested in helping develop that. In this instance, I was just wanting to see, because there's been no research, there's no research or no published research in this country, doing this sort of thing. And especially there's so little being done with vegetables. And so we really are at the beginning. And as you know, machinery will be developed. If this is really important for us as farmers, then we will develop the machinery and we will make these things, work.
Could I just add to that? I live next to Newcastle Farm, which is the university.
Yeah.
And I'm doing a vegetable growing business, trying to develop one next door to Newcastle. So that's why I came here today to see what Newcastle University has.
So that trial, the broccoli is at Nafferton, so maybe you should come and see me. We'll be there all next week. I'll be there working hard. So, you'd be very welcome.
What were the seedlings grown in? What was it, compost or? And do you find that the medium that the seedlings are being grown in affects their sort of viability when planted into the mulches and the compost?
Good question. I used peat-free. I'm Australian, by the way. I didn't say that. I'm Australian. So, like, in Australia, we don't actually, all of our growing media is peat-free because we haven't got peat. And so I'm used to that. So I use peat-free growing media. And I just used the same thing. I just used a good quality, the same commercial. I didn't want to go down the track of trying to produce it myself. I just wanted something that was going to do the job. So the focus wasn't on the growing media. I really don't know if I've got a more of an answer to that. I know it's a really, really important issue and question, but yeah.
Sorry, are you worried about... sorry, I'm here.
Oh!
Sorry. Are you worried about the soil pH? Because the silage would be quite acidic, and if you add it every year, that it would be very acidifying on the soil.
Another great question. You guys have got such good questions. So that is... It is thought like that's kind of like a general conception, because yes, silage is super acidic, but as far as we know, it doesn't actually affect, as it breaks down, it doesn't change the pH. I actually, when I did the pH at the beginning of this year, I actually did notice there has been a very, very slight drop in pH initially when I planted out the onions in the silage, and so I'm following up on that to see. The data, the literature says that it doesn't, but yes, I would be very surprised, because it's a bit like pine needles. You know, they're very acidic, but they don't actually change. It's not an acidifying effect. That is the reason that under a pine tree nothing else grows. It's apparently it's not. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Hi. Did you look at the carbon to nitrogen ratio of the compost, and did you take that into account in the differences between the silage mulch and the compost mulch?
I've collected the samples, but I haven't got the information yet. Typically, your PAS 100 compost is going to be supposedly 10 to 20 to 1. The behaviour in my trial was that it was slightly higher, and I think that the nutrient release has been slower, but I haven't got that. I'm really sorry. I actually really, really wanted to have all that data for today, but you'll have to keep an eye on me.
Just following up on that question, you say that the compost was still there 2 years later. So you say that
1 year. So actually, it is coming up 2 years. Yes. Yeah. So the compost has broken down much more slowly than the silage. Yes, it does hang around longer, and yeah.
Because I noticed my compost is normally gone within the season. So I'm just quite interested in. Is the type of compost? Maybe?
Is that homemade compost?
Yeah.
Yeah. It depends on what you make it out of, how long it hangs around, and also because we're sitting it on top. It's reduced slightly. And it's also like the interface between soil and compost is no longer obvious, because you've got worms and other things working at that interface. But it's still, significantly there. Yeah.
How did you do the weeding in the broccoli with cover crops?
Great. We didn't. The broccoli, we didn't weed. The way I did that one, I wanted to just see what happens if we don't weed at all. And so we monitored the weeds, like the weeds were monitored at the end when we harvested the broccoli, and so that we could record how much weed each treatment had. In the onions, they were weeded every 4 weeks using like a little hand hoe. So that trial's all hand done, and I actually use this little Korean hand hoe, and also hands. Yeah. Is that what you wanted to know? Yeah.
In the broccoli trial, you put the yields in kilograms per plot. How do they compare to more usual best practice organic yields in broccoli?
In the broccoli trial, I wasn't, because it was such a big trial. So you notice in the onions, I reported it as I was able to scale it up to per hectare rate. In the broccoli, the way we did it, I wasn't, because it was like I had 96 plots. And so I didn't completely cover, I didn't sow it, so I wasn't able to scale it up. Does that make sense? So it's only comparative between how much was in each plot. So I actually don't have, I can have a look at that, whether I can convert that to commercial yield levels. I can say that the quality of the heads, like some of those were like 13 centimetre heads in the better performing treatments, and they were planted in a row at a typical sowing distance, but I didn't plant out the whole bed because it was such a big trial. It would have just been beyond me. So, yeah, I'm sorry. Maybe it'll have to be.
No, that's perfectly
so,
fine.
but I do believe that, and also from my own just experience as a grower, I do believe it would be a good good levels. Yeah.
Right. Just
Sorry
a little
about
question
that.
more. You didn't mention fertilization. Did you do any fertilizer application or manuring
Excellent.
in the control?
So, and I forgot to put that in my slides. For both trials, I put a very small amount of starter fertilizer, because with the expectation, and this is based on other trial work, that initially it just takes a little bit of time for the nutrient to start to release from the mulches. And so I put on like 25%. And I put that equally across every single plot got the same very small amount of starter fertilizer. And that I do believe that's important. And I didn't collect data on that in this trial because I had to, focus. But I believe that's a really important aspect of doing this, that it's good to, because if your seedlings struggle initially, and I have seen there's studies showing that with this sort of method, if they're set back initially because of that delayed release of nutrient from the mulching material, then that will impact on yield. And it's really important to put that very small amount of starter fertilizer, and then as the mulch starts to break down, it provides all of the nutrient that's required. So it's much lower level of fertilizer application, and in that case I used a chicken manure pellet, and I calculated the nitrogen requirement that would typically be required, and then I just did 25% of that when they were planted, just in the root zone. Good question.
Okay, 2 quick questions. Thank you very much. Really interesting. I'm here. Yeah. So what you've done here has been with planted seedlings, but if a crop like carrots, which you've got the photograph there, that you'd normally seed direct, isn't that problematic, putting that through a silage or a crimp mulch?
You guys have got the best questions. You're covering everything. So I always, not in my trial, but in my own growing, if I'm planting a seed, like actually only about a month ago, I did some carrots into silage. And I can't help myself, I'm supposed to be getting this PhD, but I wanted to do carrots into silage, and I compared it into tilled. And in that case, I actually planted them with a jang seeder. Do you know the little, because it was in my hand scale trial. And this is what I always do. I push the silage, like made the row, push the silage apart, because you can't expect the plants, because they suppress weeds, and of course they're going to suppress your veggies as well. And so you have to make like you would make a furrow, if you were tilled, but all you do is you just spread the silage, and in this case I just spread it wide enough that the jang seeder could go through. And so it was actually really good. It was great. It worked really well. And so so right from the beginning, you don't have this weed problem in your carrots, like, because you know what carrots are like with weeds. My goodness. So basically the same thing with the sweet corn or anything like that. You just, and with the carrots, and I always do this with carrots, I always like make a bit of a, just spread the silage apart. But then I will actually push it back again so that also it helps to keep the moisture, because you know what germinating carrots is like. You can't let them dry out at all. And so I actually sprinkle like a little bit of the silage or whatever mulch I'm using back on top, just enough that it keeps the moisture in while they're germinating. Does that make sense? It works really well. You just do your rows of your carrots just like you would if you're tilling it. And it's just, and then you have to keep an eye on it and you get a feel of it. You get a feel of how much mulch and how to work it.
Thank you. And just as a supplementary, really, if you're trying to use home produced compost that you find it difficult to get totally weed free, can you use this sort of system, or do you have to sort of buy in something like silage or something else that is genuinely weed free?
When we first started the trial, the onion trial, and I grew the lettuces, we used farm-made compost, and it did have a lot of weeds in it, and a lot of weed seed, and we did get quite a lot of weeds come up. So things like your commercial compost do make it a lot easier. If I was you and I had that situation, I would probably use the compost and then apply maybe something like silage on top, but not as much. Or like I said, when we do these things, we're looking at what we have. But you will definitely won't, if you can't heat up your compost sufficiently to kill the weeds, then it's more challenging. I've used things like grass mulch, just plain grass mulch in Australia. You get weeds, you get so many weeds. That's why the silage is great, because it kills them all. But I used to do stuff like just pick up the grass and turn it over once it started growing. It's more questions?
One more about the carrots.
Yeah.
You said you just spread the silage. What was the ground under the...
No, because it had been covered with silage.
Since when? That whole season, sort of thing?
I always keep, if I'm doing no-till in something like silage, I always keep it covered. And I know some growers go, we take it off in the spring to warm the soil up. And I honestly, I don't.
It's just covered.
I keep it covered. Yeah, and the silage as a crop progresses, like towards the ends of onions, the silage has become quite thin. And at that point, I would put a little bit more on. Yeah, and so where we spread the silage... bare earth. You only need to bare enough to get your seeder through, or if you're doing it by hand, to do that and to allow the seeds to germinate. It's not a big open piece of bare earth. Thank you, everyone. It's been so great to talk to you.